Gabriella Brooks had never seen a dress so expensive in her life, and it wasn't even hers. It hung in the window of a boutique she passed every morning on her way to the café where she worked double shifts, 6 days a week. Silk, deep navy, off the shoulder, with a slit that made her feel scandalous just looking at it. Price tag? Her rent and then some. She shook her head and kept walking. By the time she reached the café, her back already ached and her hair was frizzing from the late summer humidity. The place was packed as usual and she barely got her apron on before a customer waved her over. The day blurred coffee orders, spilled milk, cranky regulars, and her manager barking about tables not being cleared fast enough. But it wasn't until her shift ended and she dragged herself to the corner market for a frozen pizza that her life changed. "Hey, you buying a ticket?" the woman behind the counter asked, pointing to a gaudy sign taped to the register, "Enter to win, 1 ticket to the exclusive O'Mara Foundation Gala." Gabriella laughed. "Right? Because I totally belong at a Billionaire's Gala. It's $5. You get a free candy bar with it." She hesitated. $5 was a lot when your bank account hovered under 3 figures. But she could use a candy bar, and a dream never hurt anyone. "Fine," she muttered, pulling out a crumpled bill and tucking the ticket into her purse. 3 days later, Gabriella stood frozen in front of her mailbox holding the sleek black envelope with silver lettering. She'd won. She'd actually won. The gala was in 7 days. Black tie. Hosted by the O'Mara Foundation. Location: the top level of the Opaline Tower, New York's tallest, most exclusive building. Gabriella had never been anywhere near it. Her sister, Mia, screamed when she heard. "You have to go. This is fate, Gabs." "I have nothing to wear," Gabriella said, staring at her closet full of faded jeans and second-hand blouses. "Well, you're in luck, because you have me," Mia said, pulling out her phone. "I still have my styling discount from Bloom and Bell. We're getting you a dress." 7 days later, Gabriella stood in front of the Opaline Tower wearing a gown she still couldn't believe was zipped around her body. Midnight blue silk with a slit just high enough to be risky. Her heels were borrowed. Her makeup was done by Mia. Her hair was swept into a low bun that made her feel like someone else entirely. She stepped into the glass elevator, surrounded by people in diamonds and tuxedos, and tried not to look like she was about to pass out. The ballroom was like something out of a movie. Crystal chandeliers floated above her, violins played softly in the background, and golden light made everything sparkle. Champagne flutes glistened on silver trays. Waiters in white gloves passed hors d'oeuvres she couldn't pronounce. The guests laughed like they'd been born in this world. She was definitely not one of them. "Breathe," she whispered to herself, clutching her tiny rented clutch. Then her eyes landed on him. Across the room, near a towering floral display, stood a man in a black tuxedo that fit him like it had been sewn onto him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair brushed back from his face and a jawline that could cut glass. He wasn't laughing like the others. He was watching her. Their eyes locked. Gabriella glanced behind her to see who he might actually be looking at. But there was no one else. And then he walked toward her. Her heart pounded. "Are you lost?" he asked when he reached her. His voice was smooth, low, and had the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was. "No," she said, clearing her throat. "I mean, yes, kind of." "I don't know anyone here." "Neither do I," he said, eyes twinkling. "Well, I know their bank accounts, not their names." She gave him a confused look. "I'm Isaac O'Mara," he said, extending his hand. "Host of the circus." Gabriella nearly dropped her clutch. "You're the Isaac O'Mara? The billionaire?" "I hope I'm the only one," he said with a small grin. She shook his hand, warm, firm, and somehow grounding. "Gabriella Brooks. Beautiful name," he said. "Would you let me be your tour guide tonight?" She blinked. "Me? You're the most honest face I've seen in this room all night." Gabriella couldn't think of a reason to say no, so she didn't. Isaac led her through the gala like it was a secret world only he could unlock. He pointed out the original Monet hanging over the bar, the gold leaf detailing on the columns, the famous chef preparing food in the back. He made her laugh. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. "This place doesn't feel real," she said. He glanced at her. Neither do you. Her breath caught. They danced once, then twice, then 3 times. It was nothing like the clunky dances at weddings or school proms. He held her like she was something rare, precious. When the night ended, he walked her to the elevator. "Thank you," she said, still dazed. "This was unbelievable. I don't want this to end," Isaac said, voice quiet. Gabriella blinked up at him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small card. "This is the number to my assistant. She'll arrange a car, dinner, anything you want if you'll let me see you again." Her fingers closed around the card like it might vanish. "I don't belong in your world, Isaac," she said softly. He tilted his head. "Then I'll step into yours." The elevator door opened. She stepped in, heart racing. As it closed, she saw him still standing there, looking at her like she was the only thing that had mattered all night. And for the first time in a long time, Gabriella let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, something real had started. The next morning, Gabriella stood in her tiny kitchen, staring at the contact card with the kind of caution usually reserved for explosives. Sunlight filtered through the cracked blinds, catching the silver embossing like it was mocking her. She had barely slept. Not because of the champagne or the heels or the fact that she danced in a ballroom that probably cost more than her entire building, but because of him. Isaac O'Mara. She had said no to calling him. She wasn't supposed to belong in a world where tuxedos were custom-tailored and men looked at you like you were the first real thing they'd seen in years. Last night had been a fantasy. She was supposed to leave it behind. But then, at precisely noon, a black car pulled up outside her building. She watched from her window, frozen, as a man in a charcoal suit stepped out and walked to her front door with the quiet authority of someone who never got turned away. A knock followed. Gabriella opened the door cautiously, eyes wide. "Miss Brooks?" he asked, holding a tablet. "Yes. I'm here on behalf of Mr. O'Mara. He asked me to deliver this." The man handed her a sleek envelope and stepped back. Inside was a single sheet of thick ivory cardstock with a message in handwritten cursive. "Even dreamers deserve breakfast. Let me prove it." She lowered the card slowly. "He sent a car?" "He did," the man said, then opened the door to the back seat. She stood there for a long second, war between disbelief and curiosity waging beneath her skin. Eventually, disbelief lost. The car smelled like leather and bergamot. The ride was quiet, smooth, as if the city's usual chaos had been turned down just for her. When the car finally stopped, she looked out the window and blinked at the sight of a glass atrium perched atop a high-rise, surrounded by greenery and flooded with natural light. She stepped out, heart-thumping. Inside, Isaac stood by a table set for 2, sunlight gilding the edges of his dark jacket. He wasn't wearing a tie. His shirt was open at the collar, sleeves rolled just enough to make him look less like a billionaire and more like someone who might actually belong in her life. "You came," he said, pleased. "You sent a driver," she replied, walking toward the table. It felt rude to leave a man standing on a rooftop. He pulled out her chair. "I told them to keep the menu simple. No foams. No 12-syllable ingredients." She sat, eyeing the spread, fresh fruit, warm croissants, eggs seasoned with herbs she couldn't name. "This place doesn't look like a restaurant," she said. "It's not," he said, pouring her coffee. "It's mine. I use it when I need to breathe." She stared at him. "You have a personal rooftop cafe?" "I have a lot of things. But this is one of the few that reminds me life isn't always a boardroom." Gabriella picked up her fork, unsure what to say to that. "So," he said, watching her with interest, "what did you think of the gala?" "I was terrified," she said honestly. He grinned. "You didn't look it. I was pretending. I figured. You don't strike me as someone who belongs to pretense." She paused, chewing slowly. "Why me?" she asked after a moment. Isaac looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because you looked like you were trying not to disappear. And I know what that feels like." The rest of breakfast passed in a gentle rhythm, questions asked, stories shared. She learned that he'd grown up in Manhattan but hated the cold. That he swam laps every morning to clear his head. That he built his empire from a single investment at 22. But when he talked about his work, it wasn't money that lit his voice. It was impact. "I don't care about the zeros," he said. "I care about what I can do with them." Gabriella listened, surprised. She had expected arrogance, not integrity. When the meal ended, he didn't rush her. Instead, he walked her back to the elevator. "I'd like to see you again," he said, standing close enough that she could smell the faint spice of his cologne. "What do you want from me, Isaac?" she asked quietly. He met her gaze without flinching. "Time. That's all." She nodded slowly. "One more breakfast. That's it." He smiled. "Deal." Over the next week, Gabriella's world tilted. It wasn't just one breakfast. It was 3, then lunch, then dinner on the terrace of a gallery closed just for them. Each time, Isaac revealed more his dry humor, his sharp mind, the way he seemed to see everything she tried to hide. He didn't talk about money. He didn't flaunt the lifestyle. But it was there in the way he never checked prices, in the ease with which he moved through places she hadn't known existed. Still, he never made her feel small. One evening, he brought her to a sculpture garden just outside the city. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the sound of a string quartet rehearsing in the distance. Lanterns floated above them like stars. "What is this place?" she asked softly. "Owned by a friend," he said. "But I told him I needed it tonight." She looked around. "For what?" "For you to see that beauty doesn't have to be loud." They walked among the statues in silence, her hand brushing his once, then again. Eventually, he took it. His fingers were warm, steady. Under a canopy of light and leaves, he turned to her. "I don't do this," he said. "Do what?" "Chase someone. My time is tightly managed." "So why me?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because you're the first person in years who hasn't tried to use me." "You don't want anything from me, Gabriella, and I can't stop thinking about you." Her breath caught. He stepped closer. "I know this is fast. I know your life is different from mine. But I don't care. I just want to know you." She searched his eyes, looking for the catch, the script, the exit ramp. There wasn't one. "I don't trust easily," she said. "I'm not asking for trust," he replied. "I'm asking for a chance to earn it." Their first kiss wasn't dramatic. It wasn't set to fireworks or shouted across a ballroom. It happened right there, in the quiet intimacy of a forgotten garden with the world hushed around them. It was soft, real, shocking in its simplicity. And it changed everything. From that moment on, Gabriella's days were no longer her own. She found herself looking at the world differently. She noticed the way people looked at Isaac when they walked into a room together. She noticed how quickly the air shifted when his name was mentioned, how often people tried to get close to her once they realized who she was with. It made her skin crawl. One afternoon, she walked into the café where she used to work and felt every head turn. Her former manager, who once yelled at her for being 3 minutes late, now greeted her with a forced smile and offered her a free drink. "You look different," he said. "I'm the same," she replied, but even she didn't believe it. Later that night, she sat in Isaac's penthouse, watching the city through floor-to-ceiling windows while he poured wine. "You okay?" he asked, handing her a glass. "I'm not used to being seen," she said. He came to sit beside her. "You've always been worth seeing." "They're just catching up." She turned to him, heart tight. "What happens when they stop liking the idea of me?" He met her eyes. "Then we remind them that I never cared about what they liked." And just like that, her fear quieted. But things were shifting. The more time they spent together, the more she saw cracks in his world, pressures he didn't mention. Meetings that left him tense. Calls he took in other rooms. He never explained. She never asked. Until the headlines broke. She woke to a message from Mia. "You need to see this." The article was everywhere. Billionaire Isaac O'Mara accused of backroom dealings to secure landmark property. Gabriella read the words twice, her blood running cold. She didn't want to believe it, but she also didn't know if she could ignore it. When she called him, he answered on the first ring. "I saw," he said before she could speak. "It isn't true." "Then tell me what is," she said quietly. There was a pause. "I was trying to buy the building your cafe is in. I wanted to renovate it, keep the tenants, give you the option to run your own place there if you wanted." She froze. "You were going to buy it? For me? I didn't want to tell you until it was done. I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything." Her heart pounded. "But now it looks like I'm a villain," he continued. "And I understand if you need time." She didn't answer right away. Because for the first time since they met, she wasn't sure what scared her more, the idea that he might be guilty, Or the idea that he wasn't and she might actually be falling for him. Rain streaked across the windows of Gabriella's apartment as she paced the narrow living room, 1,000 questions clashing in her mind. The walls felt too close, the ceiling too low. She hadn't returned Isaac's last call. She wasn't ready, not until she could breathe without wondering if she was falling for a man she didn't fully understand. The headlines had twisted everything. They painted Isaac as ruthless, manipulative, power-hungry. But none of those words matched the man who had memorized the way she took her coffee, who had once told a violinist to play her favorite song in the middle of a sculpture garden. Still, actions mattered. And right now his were tangled in shadows. Her phone vibrated again. Not a call this time. Mia's voice floated from the hallway. That's the 6th time. You planning to answer before he buys the moon? Gabriella sank onto the edge of the couch. What if I'm just a distraction to him? A beautiful novelty he can afford to entertain. Mia leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He doesn't strike me as the type who wastes time. And he looked at you like you were gravity. Gabriella watched the storm through the window, her fingers tightening around the phone. He tried to buy a building without telling me. Would you have let him if he had? No. Exactly. So maybe he wanted to do something good without making you feel indebted. Gabriella stood. I need to see it for myself. She didn't call. She didn't warn him. She just pulled on her coat and stepped into the thick, misty air. The city felt different, quieter, like it was waiting. The car ride took longer than usual. Traffic crawled and her thoughts twisted in time with the windshield wipers. When she arrived at the Opaline Tower, the doorman greeted her by name and guided her to the private elevator without asking a single question. At the top, the doors opened into silence. No assistants. No staff. Only Isaac, standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows in dark slacks and a navy sweater, his back to her, hands in his pockets. You came, he said without turning. Gabriella stepped inside, the quiet hum of the elevator fading behind her. I needed to look you in the eye. He turned slowly and she saw the exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. But also something else. Relief. I didn't want to keep it from you, he said. But I knew you'd say no. And I didn't do it to impress you. I did it because it made sense. She crossed the room toward him. Then tell me why. He hesitated, then gestured toward the sleek tablet on the table nearby. A blueprint glowed on the screen. I've been watching that neighborhood for months. It's filled with potential. But too many of the buildings are being swallowed by developers who don't care what happens to the people inside. I wanted to buy that block and turn it into something sustainable, affordable housing, small business grants, preservation of historic spaces. Your cafe building was part of that. Gabriella looked down at the blueprint, her eyes scanning the notes, investment breakdowns, zoning approvals, projected job creation. You didn't do it for me, she said softly. No. But after I met you, I realized it could be more. That you could be part of it. If you wanted. She stepped back, folding her arms. Why didn't you say that from the start? Because I didn't want you to think I was trying to earn your affection with real estate. She met his gaze. Maybe I wouldn't have. Or maybe I would have walked away. But either way, I would have respected the truth. Isaac nodded once. You're right. The silence between them stretched. Outside, the city glowed in the rain, blurred and golden. I told myself I could keep this simple, he said finally. That I'd take you to dinner, make you laugh, walk away when it got complicated. But I can't. I don't want to. Gabriella swallowed. You think I don't want this? I think you've spent your life protecting yourself from disappointment. And you haven't? He looked at her, then really looked like he was seeing every part of her, not just the polished version she'd worn to the gala. I have an entire team whose job is to make sure I don't risk anything, he said. But I've never been interested in playing it safe. Not when it counts. A beat passed. Then another. I'm scared too, Gabriella said. Of losing myself. Of becoming someone I don't recognize just because I'm standing next to someone like you. Isaac stepped closer. Then don't lose yourself. Build something new. With me. The words landed heavy and honest. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for his hand. He let her take it, fingers threading with hers like they were made to align. I want to trust you, she whispered. I'll earn it, however long it takes. Later that night, they stood on the rooftop terrace, the storm long gone, the sky clear and sharp above them. The city stretched out below in quiet reverence. Isaac poured 2 glasses of wine, handing her one before leaning on the railing. "You never told me what you wanted," he said as the wind lifted her hair. "What do you mean? Before all this, before the gala, what were you hoping for?" Gabriella considered the question. "To feel like I was more than what I could afford." He turned to her, voice quiet. "You are." She felt the truth of it settle in her bones. "Your life is so curated," she said. "Mine's held together with duct tape and hope. I don't know how to fit into your world." He took a slow breath. "Then let's make a new one." The next evening, he invited her to a dinner that wasn't held in a mansion or a hotel. It was in a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn, transformed into an art space filled with steel structures and abstract installations. The only table had no linen, no crystal, just candles and mismatched chairs. "This is yours?" she asked, stepping inside. "I bought it years ago. Never opened it to the public." "Why?" "Because I needed a place that wasn't for show." They sat down and a chef emerged from the back, sleeves rolled, apron stained. No waiters, no entourage, just food and conversation. Gabriella leaned back, eyes tracing the raw beams above them. "You surprise me." Isaac studied her across the flickering light. "You ground me." She didn't know what to say to that. So she didn't. She just reached across the table and touched his fingers. By the end of the week, the scandal had been dismantled. The article had been based on a falsified report. A rival investor had tried to discredit Isaac's project to block his acquisition of the property. The truth came out in a press conference that Gabriella watched from the back of a crowded room. Wearing a blazer Isaac had left draped on her couch after a late-night visit. When he stepped off the stage, he found her waiting. "They're calling you a visionary now," she said. "I didn't care when they called me a criminal. I only cared about what you thought." She reached up and straightened his collar. "I think you're still learning how to let people in. And you? I think I'm still learning how to let someone fight for me." Isaac took her hand and kissed it, ignoring the cameras, the murmurs, the flashbulbs. From that point on, there was no hiding. He introduced her as his partner at a fundraising gala 2 nights later, and when reporters asked how they met, he simply said, "Fate handed me a raffle ticket." She moved into his penthouse 3 weeks after that, but only after he agreed to let her convert one of the guest rooms into a reading nook with second-hand books and a mismatched armchair. No decorators. No stylists. Just her. And one morning, as she stood barefoot in his kitchen, pouring coffee while the city stretched awake below them, he stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "I bought something," he said against her neck. "If it's another building, I swear. It's not. It's a plane ticket." She turned to him. "Where?" "Paris. This weekend. Just you and me." She blinked. "What's in Paris?" He lifted her chin and kissed her. Slow. Certain. "A promise I intend to keep." The air in Paris was crisp, laced with the scent of blooming magnolias and a faint trace of espresso drifting from the cafés that lined the narrow streets. Gabriella stood just outside the entrance of the Hotel du Lys, her fingers curled around the wrought iron railing of the balcony that overlooked the Seine. The city below sparkled beneath the pale sun, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was standing in the middle of a memory she hadn't lived yet. Inside, Isaac was on the phone, his voice low, calm, deliberate. She'd learned his tones by now when he was negotiating, listening, dodging, deflecting. This one was different. It was the voice he used when he was setting something in motion. She stepped back into the suite, the doors swinging shut behind her. "That sounded serious," she said, folding her arms across the silk robe he'd insisted the concierge bring up in every color. He ended the call and turned toward her, tucking his phone into his pocket. "Not serious. Just precise. There's something I want to show you." Her brow lifted. "Now?" "In 10 minutes. Wear the black dress from the closet," he added, already moving toward the adjoining room. "You mean the one I said I couldn't walk in? I'll carry you if I have to." She narrowed her eyes. "This better not involve a helicopter." "No helicopters," he called over his shoulder. "Just a promise." Later, the car wound its way through quiet arrondissements, the cobblestone streets gleaming from an earlier rain. Gabriella sat beside him, her hand resting on the leather seat between them. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. He just glanced at her once, then returned his gaze to the road. They stopped in front of a gated courtyard nestled behind a line of manicured hedges and shuttered townhouses. The driver stepped out and opened the door, and Isaac extended his hand without a word. Past the gate, the courtyard opened to a garden bursting with white roses and climbing ivy. In the center stood a small glass conservatory lit from within by warm golden light. A table for two waited inside, set with porcelain, silver, and tall candles that flickered in the reflection of the glass walls. Gabriella stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the stone floor. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. Isaac pulled out her chair. "You say that every time. And every time I mean it more." He poured her wine, then took the seat across from her. There were no waiters, no staff. Just the two of them and a soft breeze that stirred the leaves outside. She picked up her fork, then paused. "Why here?" Isaac leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "Because this is where my mother brought me the day before she died. She said it was the only place she ever felt completely at peace." Gabriella set her fork down. "You've never mentioned her before." "I haven't mentioned a lot of things." He let the silence settle before continuing. "She built the first version of the foundation. Small, quiet, mostly books and school grants. After she passed, I expanded it. But this place. I've never brought anyone else here." Gabriella's throat tightened. "Why now?" "Because I wanted you to know that nothing about this is casual for me." She leaned forward, her voice low. "Then show me more. Not dinners. Not estates. You." He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "But it's not all charming and romantic. I've made choices that didn't always come from the right place." She didn't flinch. "Tell me one." He exhaled. 3 years ago, I shut down a hospital expansion because it would have interfered with a property I was developing. I justified it with numbers. But the truth is, I didn't want the delay. And now, I funded the expansion last year. Quietly. But late. Gabriella was quiet for a moment. "You're not perfect, Isaac. I'm not asking you to be." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "I'm asking you to be real." His hand turned, enclosing hers. "Then I should probably tell you what I did before we left New York. If it involves another building." He shook his head. "No. It involves your father." Gabriella froze. "I found him." She pulled her hand back. "What?" "He's in Vermont. Works at a lumber mill. Changed his name after the accident." She stood abruptly, heart pounding. "You had no right." "I didn't reach out. I didn't tell him anything. I saw what it did to you. Not knowing. And I thought maybe if you wanted to." "I don't." The words came out sharper than she intended. She turned away, pressing her palm to the cool glass. Isaac's voice was quiet behind her. "I thought it would give you closure. You thought wrong." He stood but didn't approach. "I'm sorry. I crossed a line." Gabriella turned slowly. "You keep trying to fix things that aren't yours to fix, Isaac." His jaw tightened. "I know. And I keep pretending I'm not terrified of what happens when someone like you stops choosing me. I'm not going to stop choosing you. You say that now. I'll say it tomorrow. And the day after." She moved toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then prove it. Not with dinners or penthouses or private gardens. With patience." He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then come with me tomorrow. No plans. No events. Just a train, a small town, and the best croissants in France." She hesitated. "What's the name of the town?" He smiled, just a little. "I forgot. But I remember the flavor of the jam." The next morning, they boarded a local train, no driver, no escorts. Gabriella wore jeans and a wool coat, her hair pulled back beneath a knit hat. Isaac carried 2 coffees and a canvas bag stuffed with snacks he insisted on picking himself. They sat together in a quiet car, knees touching, the countryside blurring past the windows. "Do you ever miss being unknown?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said, handing her a croissant. "But I'd miss this more." The town was a cluster of stone buildings and faded shutters with a central square that smelled like bread and pine. They wandered without purpose, stopping at a market, then a bookstore where Gabriella bought a dog-eared novel for €2. In the afternoon, they found a bench near the riverbank, the water glittering in the sun. "Did you ever imagine your life like this?" he asked, watching her turn pages. "No," she said. "But I think I dreamed pieces of it. The quiet. The space. Being seen." He leaned his shoulder into hers. "Thank you for not walking away." "I thought about it," she admitted. "But I kept seeing your face at the gala. The way you looked at me like I wasn't a mistake. You never were." She closed the book, resting it in her lap. "So what happens now?" Isaac stood, brushing crumbs from his coat. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Gabriella stared at it, heart stalling. "I'm not asking you to marry me today," he said. but I am asking you to say yes to building something with me. To walking into rooms you never thought you'd enter. To making the world smaller by making it ours. She rose slowly, eyes never leaving his. Isaac. He opened the box. Inside was a ring of delicate gold, a single sapphire set in a slender band. Understated. Elegant. Hers. I want to choose you every day. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. Gabriella reached for the ring, her voice steady. Then let's get to work. He slid it onto her finger. The wind kicked up around them, lifting the edges of her coat, carrying the scent of lavender and wood smoke. And in that moment, surrounded by a life neither of them had planned, Gabriella realized she hadn't won a raffle. She had walked into a ballroom and rewritten her future. Gabriella sat at the long oak table of her new café, the afternoon sun pouring through the tall windows and catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The final construction crew had just packed up and she was alone for the first time since the last light bulb had been screwed in. The scent of fresh paint, warm wood, and the faintest trace of roasted coffee beans from the test batch still lingered. She leaned back in the chair and looked around black and white tiled floors, open shelving stocked with ceramic mugs she'd picked herself from a local artisan, and a hand-painted sign above the counter that simply read, Gabriella's. It wasn't a flashy name. It wasn't meant to be. It was hers. The door creaked open behind her and she didn't need to turn to know it was Isaac. His footsteps were familiar now, measured, sure, but less clipped than when they'd first met, as if something in him had softened. I thought you had a meeting, she said without rising. I moved it. She turned as he approached, a paper bag in one hand and a small, white box in the other. What's all this? I figured you might forget to eat. And what's in the box? He handed it to her wordlessly, then sat across the table. She opened it slowly, lifting the lid to reveal a miniature cake shaped like a book, with fondant pages and a tiny brush of edible gold leaf along the spine. On the cover, in delicate script, it read, Chapter 1. Her breath hitched. Isaac reached across the table and gently took her hand. I know we said we wouldn't rush. I know we agreed to build this slowly. But I also know that I've never been more certain of anything in my life. She looked up at him, her heart already racing. I want to wake up next to you in the morning and argue about coffee beans. I want to fight over paint swatches and whose turn it is to do the dishes. I want to build something messy and real and ours. He rose and walked around the table, then knelt down beside her, pulling a small ring box from his coat pocket. No penthouses, no ballrooms, no candlelit gardens. Just this. You, me, and the life we've already started. He opened the box. Inside was a ring unlike the first, this one simple. A brushed gold band with a single diamond nestled into the metal like it had always belonged there. Will you marry me? Gabriella blinked down at him, her throat tightening. Yes, she whispered. God, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her with a kind of quiet reverence. She buried her face against his chest, laughing softly as tears slipped down her cheeks. I've never felt so sure of anything, she said. I have, he murmured. Since the night you looked at me like I wasn't a headline. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in the stillness of the space they'd both helped bring to life. Later, they sat on the floor, sharing the little book-shaped cake and drinking espresso from mismatched mugs, their legs tangled and their laughter echoing off the bare walls. The wedding wasn't extravagant because Gabriella wouldn't allow it. She didn't want a ballroom or a string quartet. She chose a greenhouse tucked behind a heritage museum upstate, filled with climbing roses and wild ivy. The ceremony took place at dusk, with lanterns swaying gently above their heads and the scent of lavender drifting through the air. Mia stood at her side, proud and teary-eyed, while Isaac's best friend and CFO, a sharp-tongued Brit named Julian, begrudgingly delivered the ring with a wink and a muttered, "Don't screw this up, Omera." Gabriella wore a gown she'd found in a second-hand bridal boutique, ivory, with sheer sleeves embroidered with tiny leaves. Isaac wore a slate-gray suit with no tie, his hair slightly windblown from the breeze that rolled off the hills behind them. When the officiant asked if he would take Gabriella Brooks to be his wife, Isaac didn't hesitate. I already have, he said, eliciting a chuckle from the guests. Gabriella's vows were quiet, steady. You taught me that love doesn't need fixing. It needs choosing. Every single day. And I choose you. When they kissed, it wasn't dramatic. It was slow and knowing, like two people who knew exactly what they were walking into, flawed, beautiful, and entirely their own. They skipped the reception and instead hosted a dinner under the stars for 30 of their closest friends and family. Long tables draped in linen, candles in mason jars, and a playlist Gabriella and Mia had argued over for weeks. Later that night, Isaac carried her through the threshold of a stone cottage nestled at the edge of a vineyard they'd rented for the weekend. Gabriella kicked off her shoes before he even set her down. "Did you really buy this place?" she asked, eyeing the hand-carved beams and antique fireplace. "No," he said, loosening his collar. "But I booked it for a month." "A month? I thought we could. Take the time." She wrapped her arms around his waist. "You're getting better at slowing down. I'm learning from the best." The fire crackled. Outside, the vineyard rustled quietly in the breeze. They made love with the windows open, the moonlight spilling across the sheets and the scent of crushed grapes heavy in the air. No rush. No pressure. Just the kind of intimacy that felt like a conversation between souls. The next morning, Gabriella woke before him. She slipped out of bed, wrapped herself in a thin robe, and walked barefoot into the kitchen where she found a folded note on the counter. "Gone to the village for bread and jam. Don't start the coffee without me." She smiled, pressing the note to her lips. When he returned, she was sitting on the porch steps, watching the sun rise over the vineyard. Her hair mussed and her cheeks flushed from sleep. He handed her a warm baguette and a jar of plum jam. "You remembered. I always remember the flavor of the jam." Years later, Gabriella would still keep the note in a little box beside their bed, along with the raffle ticket, the business card, the velvet ring box, a pressed rose from their greenhouse wedding, and a photo from their first breakfast on the rooftop the moment her life had started to change. They built their life slowly but with intention. Gabriella's café became a community hub, hosting poetry nights and art showcases. Isaac continued to run his empire, but more selectively, choosing projects that aligned with the future he and Gabriella envisioned. They traveled often, but always came home to a place that felt lived in and warm. They fought sometimes. About stupid things. About meaningful things. But they always circled back to the same truth: love wasn't about perfection. It was about the choice to stay, to grow, to believe. On their 5th anniversary, Isaac gave her a second ring, this one made from the melted-down metal of the first, reset with a constellation of tiny sapphires. "For every version of us we've lived," he said as he slipped it onto her finger. "And every version still to come." Gabriella kissed him in the garden behind their home, the same wild ivy climbing the fence, the same scent of lavender in the air. And in that quiet, perfect moment, she knew this wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real.